So I just woke up a couple of minutes ago, and when I was going through my messages, I see that I have a request to go over a lecture or speech given by Richard Carrier at an atheist convention. So when I opened the video, the first thing I noticed is that it was uploaded on April 1st, and I thought, seems appropriate. Anyway, moral support Giraffe and I are going to go through at least a substantial part of this video. And without further ado, Richard Carrier on Atheism Plus. Live response, by the way. Come on.
Voila.
Ah, there we go.
Atheism plus what? What do I mean by that? First, I have to give you some background ideas. A certain concept that I think that people overlook, even though it's quite obvious, is that atheism is now a community. It's not just if you're an atheist, you're not just an atheist. If you're a part of this community...
Atheism is a community. You're not just isolated atheists. And if you're part of the community... Well, you've defined everyone as being part of the community, so I don't know what the if is all about. Atheism is itself now a community, which is strange, because I thought it was the negation of a proposition to which it's a response. And an atheist is a person who assents to that proposition, thereby negating the religious proposition. So atheism is the proposition, something like that any claim that at least one deity exists is not true or unproven or something along those lines, and people who assent to that proposition are atheists. Lo and behold, I'm surprised to today learn that the whole kit and caboodle is a community. Okay.
Of the organized atheist community, if you're the sort of person who comes to conferences and so forth, you're part of an actual community. It's not...
Yes, if you're going to something that's an organization of which you're a part, then you're a part of the community that is that organization. However, from that you can't get to atheism, therefore, is itself a community.
Just a bunch of isolated atheists anymore. And we know this, obviously, because we have the new atheism movement. Notice there wasn't a big, famous new humanism movement, for example. It's atheism that's taking the lead in public and getting public recognition and becoming the biggest identity movement.
Oh, so now it's an identity movement. Curiouser and curiouser this becomes, Dick.
People identify as different things, humanist, skeptic, and so on. But the biggest one, the one that's growing, it seems, the most, is the identity of being an atheist.
The thing that's seems to be growing the most is the identity of being an atheist. Sounds like it should be an empirical claim rather than a it seems like, but I'm not your kind of scholar, I know. So carry on, sir.
Atheists are also recognized as a constituency in the media. You find that...
A constituency of the media. Normally when one uses constituency, it deals with something like the political process. Otherwise, it's just generally demographics, but I'm not going to make much hay over that. Perhaps it was just an unfortunate word choice, rather than some... Well, I'm not going to make much hay over it. Carry on, sir.
Journalists and so forth might have no idea what the skepticism community is, or the humanism community, but they know there's an atheist community, and they'll use the term atheist. It's recognized as a community that they can talk about and write about. And obviously we have numerous national, regional, and local organizations, tons and tons, hundreds and hundreds of local organizations, campus groups, community groups, that identify as atheists as part of their identity and role. And of course, obviously, as we're here, we have conferences, meetups, and social societies all across the country and beyond, where we gather socially as atheists and identify as atheists.
The interesting thing is because you're talking about all these local, regional organizations and how atheism is itself a community or some such, it might not have caught your attention, sir, but for any of those meetings you go to, almost no atheists actually show up. That is to say that the overwhelming majority of them won't be there, and yet you're nevertheless claiming that this is a sense of community. I find that just a little strange.
So this is definitely a community. And we have our own periodicals, and most importantly, online networks. Our biggest presence is definitely online, where there really is an atheist community in a large scope. Now, communities in general have responsibilities. If you're part of a community, communities have a voice, for example.
Wait a minute, so I've been defined into being part of a community that I didn't necessarily assent to being a part of, and now I have responsibilities to it? Shit. I'm going back to bed.
You can speak, the atheist community, the reporters will come and ask, what does the atheist community think on this subject or that subject?
Oh, and I wonder who we might have elected or appointed to answer those particular kinds of questions. I know it won't be Richard Dawkins, that misogynistic rape apologist. So I'm curious there, Dick, who among us has the mantle of being the grand poobah of what atheists think? Just in case a reporter comes to me and asks, I'll know who to defer to.
So the question is, are we going to use the voice we have responsibly?
Well, I thought the first question would have been the one I asked, namely, who is the person who does the representation, but okay, let's just, I guess that's just a logistical problem we'll work out later.
Communities also have resources. We have money, we have manpower, we have...
Manpower? That sounds to me to be very sexist, sir. It should be human power, which sounds speciesist. Just person power. How about that? Personhood power. I mean, after all, wouldn't want to sound sexist or whatever, since we're talking about atheism. Plus, we need to have our very delicate feelers on to be hypersensitive to these types of things.
Networks, we have communication networks, and many other aspects, resources that we can deploy. Will we deploy those resources, use those resources responsibly? And that includes information networks and action networks.
We have action networks that have resources to deploy? Gosh, sounds a little bit militant to me, but okay. Sign me up.
And communities, as a community, will be judged by people outside that community. So will we ensure as a community that we're being judged accurately? And how do we want to be perceived?
I'm just curious, do you think when the judging of the community from the external people, do you think you're going to judge us on our best representatives or our worst? I mean, I know how it works in reverse a lot of the time, so it's not that hard to figure out how it's going to work in the direction now. But anyway, carry on, Dick.
The community. These are questions we have to ask. And also as a community, through our information networks, through our organizations, through just our own communication, communities can influence their own members. So the question is, will we do that for the better or for the worse?
Well, I would think that the answer to that would depend on which community of atheists it is, but apparently there's some, what'd you say, in a large sense community. So I'm not entirely sure how you imagine this being, but you've brought up the internet, and you might not have noticed, but it's rather divisive. Anyway.
Sorry, I forgot to bring those up. Nonetheless, you got it all. Now, our community has goals.
Ooh, do we?
Obviously, one of those big goals that's been talked about today already is to increase the number of atheists.
I don't recall ever having that goal, but okay.
Hopefully, that means increasing the number of morally responsible atheists. I think that should be part of our goal as well.
I think that if you're going to have a goal, that it should be something like better educated people who can make up their own minds, rather than having the preordained conclusion that your focus is to make them atheists. But that's just me. I know I let people think for themselves, which is clearly a problem.
And also to
I mean, just look back through history and all the people who were thinking for themselves and got it wrong. I mean, God, clearly, we need to make sure that we do their thinking for them so they can come to the right conclusion.
the rights of atheists, the interests of atheists, the welfare of atheists. There we go. And that includes not just by enforcing church-state separation, and in fact several examples of that have been brought up today in various speeches of different ways that atheist organizations are helping atheists and looking after the rights and interests of atheists. And then of course...
But that's secularism, which isn't necessarily tied to atheism. I mean, that's not necessarily an atheist concern. Anyway.
Atheist organizations and the atheist community as a whole, one of its goals is to serve the needs of atheists, and these needs include knowledge interests. As a community, we have knowledge interests and social needs, and I'll talk a bit more about that as we go along.
Oh,
now, to
dear.
give you an example of what I mean about the atheism community, I have to tell you a story. Many of you probably already know this story. I happen to know some of you might not know this story. so I'm going to tell it.
Yay, story time!
A year ago or two, there was a 15-year-old atheist girl whose very religious mother gave her a copy of the Carl Sagan's Demon-Haunted World. And she went online and was so happy about it.
I heard two women laugh.
She put her picture online and told the story. Isn't this great? My mom understands me. She got me this book, even though she was very religious, and she knows I'm not. And so this is should have been a really great story, but unfortunately, this was on atheist thread on Reddit. Reddit is rather infamous, but nonetheless, in this atheist forum, very.
Why do I get the feeling that the whole of atheism is about to be judged by its worst participants? Fuck. I'm almost psychic.
The comments devolved into a long string of jokes between several atheists about raping her, essentially. Often in graphic terms. It's pretty disturbing if you read it.
Well, I'm just going to point out if someone's threatening rape, how do you do that in non-graphic terms? It just sounds like filler language right there to prolong the exploitation of some online event. But, maybe I sound a little cynical.
Now, it was worse than that. There's a lot of other sexist and demeaning remarks being thrown at this woman, this girl, by the atheists on this thread. But worse than that is that hundreds of atheists were thumbing up these remarks.
Were they? Do tell. Since that's an empirical claim, how have you managed to discern that the people who were thumbing up those comments were atheists, let alone that those comments were written by atheists? You wouldn't just be assuming facts not in evidence, would you? The reason I ask is because I looked, and most people online, you might find this hard to believe, but you can't actually determine whether they're atheists or not. So, you know what? You might be judging the community not even by its worst participants, but by non-participants. Oh my god.
More, in fact, originally, very early on, there were hundreds more thumbing them up than thumbing them down. And there, like I said, there's a lot of other sexist and belittling commentary as well.
Hundreds more thumbing them up than thumbing them down. Huh. One wonders, Mr. Richard Carrier, Dick, if I may. Dick Carrier. Yeah, joke there. Anyway, were there any responses to any of those comments on the Reddit thread that took exception to them?
Now, this isn't an isolated incident.
Oh.
One of the women who wrote about this
I thought I was about to say, this wasn't the only comments there, but I was wrong.
particular thing is Rebecca Watson. You may know that she's the target of this kind of thing a lot as well. And she's not alone. I'll talk about others in a moment. She was one of the earliest to write about all this, and she's not even close to the only target.
One of the earliest. I'm just curious, how many people have written about this? You're already aware of hundreds of comments between and among several atheists with comments going hither and thither and votes and Reddit conversation and whatnot, and then Rebecca Watson wades in. Was she there from the outset? Or did she come in some days later after people had said what they were going to say and then wrote about it when it was almost over? Or maybe after Rebecca Watson, thousands of people have started writing about it. I'm just curious. By what metric are you determining that she was one of the earliest to write about it?
The harassment that her and other leading atheist women in the movement have received online includes rape threats, joking about raping them or wishing they'd get raped, persistent jokes and insults about their appearance, calling them bitches and cunts and worse things. One of them...
It sounds almost like what you're describing as they've been exposed to the internet.
For example, had their blog comments bombarded by a handful of atheists exchanging dozens of comments graphically describing her giving them a blowjob.
Again, these people are atheists. Exactly how?
Another was sent to pornographic drawings of her having been tied up and raped and jizzed on.
Which I'm a little bit jealous about, I have to say. I have asked 2 or 3 times publicly to have a video game made where I'm raped and murdered in it. And do you know how lucky feminist frequency is? I can't get from begging people to do something that she gets for free. What's up with that shit? Oh wait, do you think the fact that I don't play the victim might have a little something to do with the types of comments I do and don't get? Nah. It's not like the internet has these things called trolls who know what's going to get your goat, and then they go after that thing that's going to get your goat, specifically because they want to get your goat. Anyway, I move on.
Yeah, and those are just examples. And this has in fact...
Oh, by the way, you started talking about all these rape threats. Could you please point out one rape threat that Rebecca Watson has actually gotten? Now, I've seen a lot of some messages that deal with rape generally, but I haven't actually seen anything that is a threat. And even Rebecca Watson distinguishes them. She has rape threats and then credible rape threats. Or another way to say that is not rape threats, because she calls those the keyword cowboys, the ones she knows are just trolling her, which aren't really threats. And then the real threats, which she refuses to show to anyone, because apparently it would jeopardize some law enforcement investigation, which is complete bullshit.
Evolved into a...
I'll explain why that's bullshit. The extent to which there would be a police investigation would be to look at it, read the words, which that's not going to change despite how many people read the words, and do some forensic work to see if they can figure out whence the message originated, which posting it on the internet, alas, for people to watch, would not frustrate.
A pattern of intensified harassment of prominent atheist women by other atheists, mostly but not exclusively men.
Mostly but not exclusively men. Huh. Did I just hear you minimize some women there? Because I'm told repeatedly that for some reason, apart from how I treat men, I have to be especially concerned about listening to the women. And yet, so frequently, your side marginalizes all the women you disagree with. So I'm just curious. If the mantra, you should listen to the women, is valid, in a way that you don't need to listen to the men, then why is it that you're free to select which ones are to be listened to, and I'm not? Just out of curiosity, I know I won't get an answer to that question.
They actually are getting far more harassment, these women are getting far more harassment and abuse from atheists currently than from Christians or Muslims or other religious believers.
And these are empirical claims. I'm going to ask again, and I know I've only been asking for a couple of years and I won't get an answer. How do you know the religious views that the vast majority of these people have?
I discovered this myself. I was extremely shocked and appalled. And this included stalking behavior in some of the cases of these women.
I know, like, are you going to talk about Greg Layden?
Sustained sexual harassment, following them everywhere online, digging through their past online histories to find things to make fun of or to invent new reasons to attack them with. Repeatedly sending them hate mail, often with sexually harassing remarks or images, or repeatedly filling their blog and YouTube comments with those things, and then they have the audacity to complain when these women close their comments feature. Now, it appears dozens, if not hundreds, of atheists have been engaging in this behavior, targeting any woman.
How does it appear? And I wonder if there's any truth to the maxim that appearances can be deceiving. Just, you know.
Who complains about it, especially, or even who just discusses feminism in any substantial way. And the women who have been targeted by...
Again, about Greg Layden, the type of feminism that goes around arguing that men are just damaged women, that the male brain is some genetically inferior female brain. That kind of feminism. Yeah, I can't imagine why people might oppose that. They're dick.
This harassment campaign include not just Watson, but Surly Amy.
Hey, wait a minute. Layden hasn't harassed them that I know of. Are you talking about someone who's not Greg Layden? Ah, fuck me running.
Stephanie Svan, Greta Christina, Ophelia.
Hey. Don't bring up Greta Christina. She got a nice pair of shoes out of the deal, so...
Jen McCrae, and Amanda Marcotte, and that's just the short list. So...
Is that like the short bus? All the seats on this bus are full. Thank God we had the short list. I'm sorry, maybe that was flippant.
When I'm talking about atheist community and atheism plus, what I have in mind here is the first thing I mean by plus.
Not negative.
Is atheism plus basic moral values. Atheists should not be doing this.
Oh yeah, well, you know, since I'm not part of that community, I'm going to see how I might go about judging them. Is it the atheism plus moral values to tell rape victims that they would have been better off had they been murdered so as to have been spared having to remember their having been raped? Is that good or bad? I'm It's so hard to tell these days.
Atheists should not be tolerating this.
What if the person who does it is a moderator on the forum and then bans the rape victim after telling the rape victim that the rape victim would be better off dead, and then accusing the rape victim of being a victim blamer, talking about his own rape when he was raped? Now my moral compass is clearly deviant because P.Z. Myers doesn't like me, so I'm just curious, is this the moral standard I should adopt? I mean, I'm not part of the community, so I just want to know before I, get dragooned into that one too.
In our community, as a community, we should be speaking up against this and disapproving it.
I'm having a Tom Lehrer moment right now. The folk song Army. It takes a lot of courage to get up in front of an audience and come out in favor of all the things everyone else is against, peace and justice and brotherhood and all that crap. Hey, Richard Carrier, you sound like you have the intellectual firepower to be the grand poobah of atheism. I mean, listen to the way this audience is eating up your very controversial statements. So brave.
It gets a little worse, though.
I bet you got a standing ovulation, didn't you?
When I first blogged about this, and I was not the first to blog about the Atheism Plus movement, not by a long shot, but when I first blogged about it, my first blog entry, I basically quite stridently denounced all this sexual harassment in no compromising terms. I argued for greater humanitarian concern from atheists, and...
Which sounds a bit like humanism, but, anyway.
I advocated that we adopt at least 3 basic moral values, and I spelled them out, I explained them in detail, and those were compassion, integrity, and reasonableness.
Compassion, integrity, and reasonableness. Okay.
And no sooner had I done this than I was accused of being Hitler, Stalin, and I was accused of starting a religious cult and various other things shouted at me. So, before I continue with the rest of this talk, let me just get one thing clear, just get this out of the way.
You're not Hitler.
Things that do not make you Hitler, Stalin, a cultist, or a religionist. The obvious, calling men who engage in overt sexual harassment douchebags and assholes, not on that list. Arguing for greater humanitarian concern from atheists doesn't make you Hitler, sorry. Asking people to be compassionate, honest, and reasonable doesn't make that list. Disowning people who declare their refusal to be compassionate, honest, or reasonable. I mean, if they stalwartly say, we reject your moral values, I'm going to disown those people and I'm going to say so. That does not make me a religionist or a cultist or anything like that. It doesn't make me divisive either. It means that I'm trying to promote humanist values and...
Oh, wait. You just said because. No. Those are logically consistent. You can be both. You can be divisive and in support of certain moral values, even if they're the best moral values. The fact that you're arguing for the best moral values doesn't mean that everyone's going to agree with you. And if everyone doesn't agree with you and it causes, there's some people who do and some people who don't, that is by definition a division.
That's kind of the point of what I'm going to talk about. But first of all, again, Atheism Plus is a thing. We got to get that across. Oops.
Did you say we've got to give that across? Just kidding.
The term was first promoted by Jennifer McCreight based on an idea from one of her readers to describe a movement that had been growing within New Atheism over the last 5 years. In fact, the movement existed before it was named. This movement was for promoting moral values more in the atheist movement and the discussion of societal problems among atheists more than we already do, and for making the atheist community more welcoming of and responsive to women and minorities. And this was the basic idea of it. So when we're talking about Atheism Plus, we mean, is it going to come? There it is. Not just, we're talking about we should be, if we're going to be an atheist...
It's not sexual, sir. I'm offended. Where's the conference organizer? Where's my Twitter account?
We should be not just atheists, but we should be atheists plus all of this. When Jen did her blog blog, I quoted it, and this is a quotation from my blog of her blog. She gave a list of, these are the kinds of things we're talking about. We're going to be atheists, plus we care about social justice.
Well, why not just quote the primary resource? Why quote your work quoting a primary resource? Oh, wait. Blog hits.
We're going to be atheists, plus we support women's rights. We're going to be atheists, plus we protest racism. Atheists, plus we fight homophobia and transphobia. Atheists, plus we use critical thinking and skepticism on all subjects. Now,
Except feminism. Curiously enough, Richard is selling the pass here. The fact that feminism has as a precept, supposedly anyway, the equality of women, doesn't mean that it's the only proposition of feminism. And since there exists more than one proposition of feminism, it is entirely rational for someone to reject the label or the philosophy of feminism for some of the other reasons associated with it, not the equality of sexes. But to say I'm not a feminist, these people commit the structural logical fallacy of thinking, oh, well, because they're not feminists, therefore they deny that women are equivalent to men. That's the reasoning problem there, and Richard mightily makes use of this.
Harris, of course, have accused her and others of making this the complete list. This is not the complete list of all the things that we're talking about or advocating. This is just a list of what should be the clear and obvious no-brainers. So that's the basic idea of it, but it can be...
And, you know, it's very curious that you're talking about all this reasonableness and logic and critical thinking and skepticism while saying that these are no-brainers. You should by now know that the obvious answer is not always the right answer, which, whether it is or isn't in this case, is irrelevant to the structure that you claim should be the core of this movement. And if it's going to be the core of this movement, then every proposition that you make should be excoriated to the maximum extent it's able to withstand it. That's how you guarantee that whatever remains is likely, not certainly, but likely to be the true claim. But to even remotely skirt any issue that is on the periphery of feminism is as though you've walked into, I don't know, some church and pissed on a Bible. That's how the Atheism Plus crowd reacts.
Broken down in a different way.
Break it down. Come on, white guy. Break it down.
What we're talking about is atheism plus humanism plus skepticism. Now there are actually three separate communities, and they exist, and there's a lot of overlap between them, obviously. There's the atheist community, the humanist community, and the skeptic community. We want to merge the ideals of all these communities within the atheist movement itself.
But if there's overlap, then they've already been merged in the people they're overlapped with. So in other words, there wasn't any need for anything. All you had to do was say, well, I accept this premise, I accept that premise, and I accept the other premise. Holy shit, look at that. On the Venn diagram, I just magically appeared right in the center where everything overlaps. Yay, me!
We want the atheist community to basically be this: atheism plus humanism plus skepticism.
So in other words, it's not enough that I'm an atheist and I happen to take on this precept and this political philosophy and that political position, but now it has to become the dogma, the official party line of atheism. Generally, all atheists, all loyal and true atheists, have to take this on because we're trying to make this what atheism actually is. Despite the fact that none of these other issues have the first thing to do with the proposition that at least one God exists. They have nothing whatever to do with it, which is what atheism deals with exclusively. Whether or not that proposition is true, false, or likely true, or likely false, or indeterminate.
Now it starts with atheism.
And some of us just happen to like things a little bit pure. Look, atheism, let's not muddy it. It's one thing. It's the rejection of another proposition, the negation of that proposition, full stop. And, as it happens, being an atheist, being a person, I happen to be an atheist, I happen to be this, I happen to be the other, I happen to be this, and happen all these things, and because of just the weird happenstances of my life, this weird confluence of happenstance, which has just, bam, instantiated in me, I fit into all these categories simultaneously. The fact that I, and probably a lot of other people, fit into all these different little bins says nothing whatever about whether all these individual bins fit together of necessity, that they are, in some sense, related. They're related through me, but they're not related through each other. There's nothing about answering the question, does a God exist, that gets you to, are women equal to men? Are gay rights equal to straight rights? Is racism bad? There's just no connection. There's no logical relationship among any of these categories, and yet you're saying, we want them all to be the same thing. They're not.
Because we're atheists and we're within the atheist movement, and atheism is the largest outspoken identity movement of all of these groups. But that doesn't mean, for example, if we define agnostic, for example, as someone who's an uncertain atheist, they're not sure yet if they're an atheist or if they're going to commit to atheism or how atheistic they are, they're welcome in the movement. And there's different ways you can define atheism.
Commit to atheism. I commit to not committing to that. Whew! What do you mean? Well, atheism is the rejection of the claim that at least one God exists, and I'm committing to atheism, which is the not committing to that proposition, so I'm committing to not committing to that proposition. It's very taxing work, let me tell you. I'm getting verklempt.
One is the sort of clinical definition. If you don't have a belief in God, you're an atheist, and by that definition, agnostics are atheists. But as an identity label, as something that you call yourself, you may want to say you're an agnostic to indicate that you don't have the
But that same definition is fully applicable to religious people who are also agnostic. They believe a God exists, but they don't know that they can actually answer the question. And yet they think they're religious. But on your definition that you've just said, on this clinical definition, which isn't clinical, but leaving that to the side, they're simultaneously atheists and believers. Well, there's a wonderful fucking definition.
certainty that God doesn't exist that maybe other atheists do. So as an identity label, atheism can mean a different thing. And when I go through the rest of this talk, I'm going to mean atheism as an identity label, but also in that clinical sense of all non-believers who join and work with us in the same common community.
Which is the whole of atheism, as you set out at the beginning.
Humanism is a basic idea. We're talking about adopting some, or all, if not all, of the moral and social goals of humanism. This should not be controversial, and yet it has been.
The ideas behind humanism, people are people, they're equivalent, human rights, all this stuff, isn't what's controversial, Dick. You're trying to shoehorn it into atheism as part of the definition of atheism is what is controversial. You're saying anyone who doesn't take the label, which you admit is an identity label now, and the fact that someone doesn't want this particular, they don't want to take a particular identity label, says nothing whatever about whether they support any of the goals or all of the goals or none of the goals. They don't want the label for some reason that might just have to do with the label. That the very act of their not taking that label that you've defined for them, conveniently enough, how friendly of you, makes them bad, immoral people. These are the things that are controversial, you nitwit.
And skepticism. This is important. Skepticism as a movement.
Oh, it's so not important. Go be skeptical over the Atheism Plus forums. Get back to me on that.
Has its own set of values and methods that they're applying to ideas in different domains. We want to grab those values and methods and apply them to all domains and make that a part of atheism as a movement. So that includes, therefore, the critical commitments and interests of modern skeptics.
Then it's so strange to me to hear you saying, on one hand, that these are no-brainer questions. Entire forums are being set up where you're not allowed to ask certain questions while simultaneously saying that we need to be skeptical about all domains of discourse, all domains of intellectual life. It's so strange. Or do you want to propose that feminism is not an intellectual movement so much as an emotional movement? And it's very difficult to be skeptical of emotions because emotions aren't rational anyway.
The modern skepticism movement. Now, Atheism Plus is already a thing. Atheism Plus, as I just described it, everything I've just told you.
That's a ringing vote of confidence there. There's an endorsement. Atheism Plus, it's already a thing. Sign up today. Chlamydia, it's already a thing. In your thing.
Is and was and has been already a growing and active movement within New Atheism overall. Someone just gave it a name. I mean, that's all that really happened. It existed already. It was already influencing organizations and the community. Someone just realized that, all these people have some common shared values and goals, and they named it. And that's when all hell broke loose. But anyway. Another point. Not everyone furthering its goals adopts the specific label of Atheism Plus, nor need they. There's no requirement for this.
Oh.
And to give
Oh, snap.
example, Atheism Plus is just a clinical name for a movement that
Clinical.
exists. It's like saying that you're a Homo sapiens sapiens. That's your species. But that doesn't mean you have to go around constantly saying, talking about Homo sapiens sapiens, identifying as Homo sapiens sapiens. You can call yourself a person, a human, a man, a woman. What word you use doesn't matter.
Then one is curious, what's up with all the labeling and the whole fact, if I'm not part of Atheism Plus, the question is, why aren't you part of it? Why don't you take the label? Why don't you go around and advocate for it? And I mean, I don't go around advocating for being human. Anyway, that's probably irrelevant.
People are clinically defined as Homo sapiens sapiens, but it doesn't matter what label you use, we understand what you're talking about. So Atheism Plus is just that clinical name for the movement, the values and ideals that exist. We don't require anyone to adopt the name of this.
Oh, so are you one of the spokespeople, or are you not? And why is it that your opening salvo was put in the terms that it was put into, particularly that, anyway, I'll just refer people, I'm not going to rehash all that nonsense, so let's just get through this.
And again, institutions, we have many different institutions within our movement, they can pursue, certainly, their own narrower goals, their own specific mission goals, while still embracing Atheism Plus as a laudable set of goals.
But I don't endorse Atheism Plus, even though most of the precepts I take as a given. Women are equal to men, gay right, all these things I am in favor of, and yet I out of hand reject the label, and I reject that community as toxic. But here you're saying you don't have to take the label, so long as you still support the label? I thought that you were saying that the label wasn't important, and here you are now saying that it is. I'm confused.
Within the wider atheist community that they serve. And that's the basic vision that we have in mind. Now remember I said earlier about communities having responsibilities.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Number one, to give you an example, Christians, you know this, all of you know this, Christians claim atheists have no morals. So do you disagree with that? I'm assuming you do disagree with that? Then stand up for and act on your values, defend them, actually act on them in the way you treat your fellow atheists, as well as the lip service you give to those values when you're debating Christians. Embody the values that you believe in, explain them and defend them. Number two, we can use our resources, all of those resources, our manpower and our communication networks, some of our money perhaps, to make the atheist community better informed and more active on social issues, and not just in science, philosophy, and religion. And I'm going to explain exactly some examples of what I mean in that respect as we get along. And also, let's accept and encourage constructive criticism of each other within the movement, and use it to better ourselves and the community and its institutions. We have
That's a good one. Start at Pharyngula.
Be ready to accept that and to make good use of it, and not be talking about we can't criticize each other. That's not going to be helpful for progress within the movement.
Yeah, start at Pharyngula, spread out the rest of Free Thought blogs, then go over to Skepchick and be skeptical there too, and constructively criticize them, and then give it a whirl over at Atheism Plus. Yeah, okay. Get back to me on that, Dick. Oh, use an anonymous name, too.
So to go back to the first of these, the main point here as a community, as a representative, as someone who's representing the atheist community, as someone who's a member of the atheist community.
My God. 17 minutes in. This guy can stay longer in 15 minutes than relatives can in a month.
Don't let bad atheists represent you. Don't let them think they do.
Ah, see, there's the thing. They don't represent me. They represent themselves. I know it's strange, but the fact that, I don't know, one atheist goes out and does something bad is not actually a reflection on me, even if someone else thinks that it is. The fact that another person chooses to engage in fallacious reasoning, there's no argument whatever that I'm obliged to unfuck their poor reasoning. I may or may not, but I don't have an obligation, which is what you're talking about, responsibility. I don't have a responsibility to do that. Nor do I have a responsibility to disassociate myself from a group I've never associated myself with.
Your silence either. That's the kind of thing we want. We want more proactive atheists representing and speaking out for their values and pointing out which...
But you get exactly that with atheists who don't represent you. They are outspoken, apparently, because you know they don't represent you, and they're out there talking to people, and they're representing their position. Your complaint isn't that they're not doing exactly what you want. Your complaint is they don't agree with every jot and tittle of what you declare they're supposed to.
Atheists don't represent them. In regard to the second one, show the world that the atheist community is not tone deaf to major issues in the world. Christians can talk about how they care about poverty and all these other issues. Do atheists care about those things? Does that make them better people than us? Or in reality, and I think in reality most of the people here do care about those things as much as Christians do. And as atheists, you should be seen as caring about those things as atheists.
Well, I would just submit that not many people care about it a great deal. It's not as though we couldn't solve the problem, we just don't really have the interest in it. But that's neither here nor there. I don't even know what it means to be concerned about it as an atheist. That just doesn't follow. It's not part of atheism. It's not anything whatever to do with one's view about whether God exists or not. This is one of the problems of being a hammer. Everything looks the same. It's all just a nail that you need to whack with your hammer of atheism. Oh, as an atheist, I had lunch today. Let me tell you, I had the best butter that went. It was a sun-dried tomato butter. Oh my God, it was great. And as an atheist, I really loved spreading it on my bread that was made leavened, because I'm an atheist and we don't do unleavened bread here in the atheist household. But as an atheist, man, I really enjoyed having lunch. It's just moronic. As an atheist, I care about poverty. I don't care about poverty as an atheist. I don't care about, or not care about, anything as an atheist. It's not a political position. It is the negation, it's the rejection of one proposition, namely that at least one God exists. As a person who has feelings and is able to reason things out, I care about various and sundry things, but as an atheist, I don't give a fuck about anything, because none of it's tied to whether or not I believe in a God. As even your argument here concedes, whether you think there's a God or whether you don't think there's a God, you can still nevertheless be concerned about poverty. And that, the concern about it transcends either position, means that you're not doing it as a member of either group. It's something else. Idea of fixity is a dangerous thing, dick.
Atheist community, the same way the Christians do, because that's how Christians promote their own image. We can promote our own image the same way, and we had better do so. And finally, we need to heed the difference between harassment and just gratuitous verbal abuse and criticism. First of all, obviously, we should be making that distinction, but whenever you see people making a false equivalency between these, saying that these are the same thing, you should call them out for that and point out, no, they're not the same thing at all.
Should I just use those words? Those are not the same thing at all. Period. So what about when people start reacting to constructive criticism as though they're being harassed? Like, I don't know, earlier when you said going back through things they've written in the past so as to use them to embarrass them. I'm sorry, their reputations can be they can't complain if their reputation is no better than the worst moment they've had. And the fact they've written something in the past that's inconsistent with something today makes it perfectly legitimate to say, hey, that thing you're saying today is inconsistent with what you've argued in the past. Which is your position? Now, there's no problem whatever to change one's mind. It happens. But the problem is you say, okay, today A, and then a year B, and then someone says, hey, you've said A and then B, and A and B are mutually exclusive. Which do you choose? And you say B, and then the day later you're saying, but you guys still need to do A. Well, I'm sorry, didn't yesterday you say that B was the thing that we should do, and that's inconsistent with A, yet today you're saying it's A? Well, I've changed my mind again. Oh, I see. You change your mind depending on what day of the week it is. These are constructive arguments. The fact that some people take it as harassment, like Stephanie Zvon saying this is online stalking. Yes, reading your publicly available blog to know your position or your claimed position on certain areas is not stalking. It's just called research. In fact, I'm going to keep calling them out, because calling people out is oh so important.
The idea of the community, that our community has goals. I mean, one of those, of course, is to increase the number of atheists, and here I'm saying preferably those should be morally responsible atheists. And so that should be a part of our idea of how to achieve our goals. That should be a component of what we're thinking about.
Wait, part of the way of achieving the goal of getting more atheists, perhaps morally responsible atheists, is to get more... That's just to restate your goal. That's not a mechanism to achieve it. That's just this, hey, we have this goal and we should do stuff to reach our goal, because our goal is our goal, and that's the means by which we'll get our goal.
Increasing the number of atheists as if their moral values and the things that they care about are irrelevant. And then, of course, to protect...
No. They're not irrelevant. They're irrelevant with respect to atheism. They're relevant with respect to the person. They're just irrelevant with respect to, again, the negation of a proposition that at least one God exists. I don't know why. False equivalence, I believe you called it. I don't know why this is a difficult concept for you to grok.
Rights of atheists, and that includes the right to be free of harassment online and off. And that doesn't.
I'm sorry, I thought there was this thing about you don't have the right not to be offended. Now, where the line is drawn between offense and harassment, it's not like some clear-cut, I don't know, line in the sand. It's not that easy to determine. Just saying, I don't believe in God, some people take as harassment. I don't. You talk as though these things are just so easy to sort out in all cases, and they're not. But, I mean, of course you can always point to the trolls and say, well, do you agree with what they did? Of course not. They're trolls. That's what trolls do. That's why I don't treat trolls as being anything other than trolls. I don't pretend, unlike Rebecca Watson, Stephanie Vaughn, you, Peasy, all these other dipshits, I don't pretend that trolls are the representative sample of the world's population, or any subset thereof, apart from trolls. You people do.
Necessarily mean political rights. There are also moral rights as well. Moral rights that we can stand up and defend socially as a community. And then to serve the needs of atheists, including knowledge interests and social needs. And I'll talk about these each in turn. And as I talk about this, I'm going to be talking about what organizations can do, but I have to tell you, this movement has been around for years. We've been working on it, and we've been influencing and talking to organizations all across the country, locally and nationally. And many organizations have already been responsive to a lot of our ideas. And I have to say, American Atheists is really on the forefront of being responsive to these ideas. And I'll give you some examples as we go along. But when I talk about organizations, I have in mind all organizations. So if there are people here who are members of other organizations, local organizations, campus groups, other national organizations besides American Atheists.
Not that we want to make this a dogma or a totalizing anything. Just, we just want to influence everything.
Heed what I'm talking about. And all of you, there are many of you here who are going to be future leaders of the movement. Because I see this trend of people accepting...
We're going to be future leaders of not believing. I cannot believe way better than you cannot believe, sir. Oh, I doubt it, madam. Oh, no, trust me. I can doubt... Watch how I doubt. Oh, that's quite good. Oh, thank you. I bow. You're our leader. Anyway, fuck off, Richard. Have a good day, everybody else.